This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pod and the Pendulum. It is the show that covers horror movie franchises one movie and one episode at a time. And this week, we are setting off the sirens, we are battening down the hatches, and we are grabbing any weapon we have on hand because we are kicking off a new series with The Purge, written and directed by Nostradamus, apparently. So, fantastic. As always, I am not alone, and I have two people by my side that I know could absolutely tear it up on Purge night. Up first, from the Disenfranchised podcast, which really would be like if there was a Purge, I guess we would have to go after you because we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here.
We kind of are, yeah.
It's Mr. Stephen Foxworthy. Stephen, how are we?
Doing great, Mike. I got my knife on hand.
You got a shiv?
I do. It's actually a hunting knife. I just happened to have this here. I had to open some mail earlier, so I just happened to have it at my desk.
Amazing.
But yeah, I'm prepped and ready for this recording.
You are.
Mike, unless if there was any doubt in your mind. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, come at me, bro.
Steven is ready to throw down. He's got his knife, his little homemade shiv. Excellent. I love it when you come prepared. All right.
I try.
Also joining us, and I see her furtively looking around the room like, what can she grab? From Ghouls Magazine, back for more after making her debut on 3 episodes of the Phantasm series, Miss Ariel Powers-Schaub. Ariel, how are we?
May God be with me, apparently, because I did not bring any kind of weapon to this gunfight you guys are having. Other than that, I'm good. I'm looking around like, I live in the Midwest. There must be a weapon within reach of me somewhere.
I was going to say, anything, honestly, if you're from the Midwest, anything you can grab can be fashioned into a weapon relatively easily.
That's the attitude I bring to life, so yes. Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
Passive...
That's the Midwest credo right there.
Right.
Passive-aggressive politeness.
And shivs.
Disarming. Okay. Disarming.
You're thinking
persons.
Minnesota.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we are here to talk The Purge, and I guess before we get a little bit into the background of the movie, and it is the newest series we're covering, which is kind of interesting. Like, this is the newest franchise that we've covered. So I kind of want to get your initial thoughts, like when you first saw the movie, what your initial impressions of it are, and, also if you were to take part in a Purge night, what would be your crime of choice? Like, what would you do?
So I was late to the party. I was late to the Purge party. And I watched it for the first time during the first round of COVID lockdowns.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so there was some processing that had to happen there. I just missed it when it first came out. I didn't mean to, but like the early to mid 2010s, I was really busy. I was in grad school and I just was working a lot. And so I just was like, I missed a lot of movies that came out at that time and I'm catching up on them, which is fine. But there was one night in lockdown where I was just like, well, I haven't seen The Purge yet. I guess I'll do that. And I was muted when you said it was written by Nostradamus, but I laughed a lot at that because I totally know what you mean, and I'm sure we'll get into it just with everything, gestures broadly at everything for the last few years, right? So that's a lot of pressure to pick your crime for Purge night. So first of all, I don't think I want to go out because I don't want to die, right? So I'm like, okay, what crimes could I commit from home? So I'm like, some kind of identity theft, but I don't want to wreck another person's life. Like, I kind of want to figure out a way to Robin Hood this. And, like, because the other thing I think about is, like, then I have to deal with the guilt tomorrow. So I don't want to do anything too bad where I'm going to not be able to deal with it later. So I'm like, can I, like, I don't know, steal a bunch of money from a corporation that doesn't need it and give it to people who do need it? That's like the lamest possible answer for this question. But I just also don't want to admit on recording what also might be true. So we're going to leave it at that.
Okay. So what would you say then? because it's just the three of us, no one else will hear this. What's the worst crime you have done? What can you admit to on tape right now?
I was arrested for shoplifting when I was 17, and I did have to go to jail for like a day. So wow,
a day, not like a little. Wow.
For like a work day, like 10 hours. Okay. So my record's expunged because I was a minor and I did probation and things like that.
I didn't think you were going to answer. Holy crap!
Right,
hey man, you know, we were all teenagers once. We made some mistakes. I own my mistakes.
Did you find the largest person in jail and punch them, like to just show your dominance right away?
No, I was scared shitless, dude.
Okay.
I was glad they let me wear my shoes. Like,
oh wow. Okay.
I was terrified. I was in a cell with like a drunk tank, basically, with like 15 other women who are all older than me, and some of them were fighting, and some of them were crying. And there was just an open toilet, and I was very out of my element, obviously. So I was just like, I'm going to sink into the wall until someone comes to get me. It was very dumb.
Are you sure that you just weren't in the movie Malignant?
I mean, had I been in the movie Malignant, that would have been sweet.
Okay.
Right?
I'm a big fan of Malignant, so I won't hear otherwise.
As all of us.
We all. Yeah.
As we all are. Stephen, how about yourself? Your first experience?
I also late to the party on this one. Did not see this movie until I think it was just a couple years ago, 2021, actually. Watched this movie and was really impressed by it. Thought I might want to go ahead and try to watch all the Purge movies, and then didn't get around to any of the others. So this is the only movie in this franchise I've seen. I'm very excited to dig into the rest of them as we continue throughout this series. But yeah, I really dug it. I was telling you before we started recording, I really love the way that genre fiction in particular is able to kind of deal with political storytelling or religious storytelling in a way that seems kind of unapproachable from a straightforward means. And by using kind of a hyperbolic way to tell the story, you're able to kind of see the reality of the situation a lot clearer. And I think this movie does that really, really well.
Yeah. Excellent. And for yourself, it's Purge night.
It's Purge night.
Get away with anything.
I am at heart, deep down in the depths of my soul, I am a coward. So I am Kevin McAllistering that shit. This is my house. I have to defend it. I have a bowling pin in the other room, so I've got something I can use to bludgeon people with. That was given to me by my late grandfather. I've got a spoon here that says it kills monsters if you believe it does, so I can gouge eyes with that. I've got this knife. I've got, like I said, I'm from the Midwest. I've got a nutcracker here because I had nuts for a snack earlier, so I'm sure I could do some damage with this. come at the king, you best not miss, I guess. I don't have any handguns, but I have other things with which I can use to defend myself. But no, I'm not going out and committing crimes. I am, as I said, a coward. Even if I knew I could get away with it, it would take a lot to work up the nerve to actually go out and do crimes.
And if you had committed a crime in your past, which crime would that have been?
I don't know, probably some kind of moving violations.
Okay, jaywalking.
Yeah, jaywalking, speeding, stuff like that. Sure. I was a Christian school teacher for 8 years, so I'm not the guy who's going to go out and commit crimes. So
well, there's still time.
Well, you say that, but you just pointed to everything in your house and talked about how you would use it to hurt people. So I'm going to go on record as never messing with you.
Look, but here's the thing. I talk a big game, but I'm just a marshmallow.
Oh,
I'm just a big old cuddly teddy bear. Ask anybody, they'll tell you.
Okay.
I give the best hugs in the world, and I like to give hugs.
Excellent.
So if you see me on the street, ask my permission. I'll probably give you a hug.
All right, big spoon.
Damn straight.
Damn straight. So for me, I believe this was like an opening afternoon movie. Like it was at a time where I routinely worked on the road and made my own schedule. So if a new movie was coming out, I was interested in, like, it would be like 10 a.m. showing on a Friday to catch it. And especially coming off of Sinister, like I was all there for the Ethan Hawke renaissance in genre films. So I was very excited for that reason. And the hook of this movie, the 12 hours of violence occurring and no repercussions of it, was very intriguing to me. I'm like, this sounds like a pretty interesting premise. I remember enjoying the movie. I thought it was a pretty solid genre effort, a pretty good action horror movie, but also thinking like there sure wasn't a lot of actual Purge events in this movie. It felt like it was a massive world, and we were shown one very, very small section of it, which caused me to miss the next two movies. Like I still haven't watched Purge Anarchy, still haven't watched Purge Election Year. The first Purge drew me in with its poster, going like, oh, all right, we're on the same side here. I will absolutely be going to this. And I caught the first Purge, the Forever Purge in theaters when theaters reopened again. Not because I had a massive burning desire to see it because of that movie, but just movie theaters are open again. I will go see anything right now. And enjoyed both of those movies to varying degrees. So my thought on the series as a whole is that, and I think I'm with you, Stephen, there's a lot of meat to chew on with like the concepts of this movie. And it's going to be interesting to see if the films themselves live up to like the meaty texture. Because I'm just, little inside baseball. I haven't done as much prep for this as typical because I want to spread it out over the next few episodes. Some of these concepts, I think, each one goes a little bit deeper. So I kind of want to go a little bit deeper with each episode with the psychology, the sociology, and the economic principles of each of these movies and save a little bit. But there's been a fairly decent amount of academic papers written on this series, in particular the first three movies over the past few years. And some of these articles are a pretty good read, so that should be interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the background of this movie. And there's not a ton. It's pretty straightforward compared to like our Phantasm series, where each of those movies felt like a minor miracle to create and had a pretty in-depth and interesting story. This is really the story of, in some ways, Blumhouse, which it's Jason Blum's production company. They have a very solid business model, which is we're going to focus almost exclusively on low-budget genre and horror movies that we feel there's enough of a concept there that we can invest a little bit of money but make a lot of money. Very low-risk, high-reward business model, and it has served him really well. starting with Paranormal Activity. It was created by Oren Peli, and that'll be a really fun series to cover at some point. I'm thinking sooner than later. By 2024, we'll get to that series because I love the first few. Although they didn't create Paranormal Activity, they acquired it from Oren Peli, the rights to distribute it for about $1 million, and it would go on to make almost $200 million worldwide in 2009. So hard to argue with that return on investment. And after that, they just started to churn out, very much like Saw, which is ironic because it was the first Paranormal Activity movie. It came out the year, I want to say, was it Saw 6 or 7,
6.
Ari?
Yeah.
6, okay. That's kind of the one that killed the franchise, correct? Compared to how it was a much lower return than the others had done.
Yes, it made less money than any of the movies, even though it was reviewed really favorably. And that's why they wrapped it up with one more movie instead of 2 more, which they had originally planned. And it's interesting because the 5th movie did very well financially, but wasn't reviewed very well. And the 6th movie is just like objectively better.
And we see that a lot, though. Like, you see that with, like, Friday the 13th Part 5, I think, made more than Part 6 did, which was the return of Jason. It's usually, like, it's not the bad entry that can really harm a franchise. It's the one after that.
Especially
They can do a lot of damage.
Social media, you know?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that makes sense. I mean, you go to see the bad one and you're like, I'm done with this. So when the next one comes out, you're like, I'm out. I swore off it, and you tell me it's good. I don't believe it.
No. So you think about that first Paranormal Activity really changes the landscape. There was a time where I want to say like Blumhouse had inked a deal with Paramount saying we're going to create all of these like very small $1 million movies, and Paramount was going to distribute them and almost flood the market with horror movies.
Did he sign with Paramount first? Because I know he's with Universal now.
They're with Universal now, and I think it was going to be a first look deal with Paramount. I want to say The Devil Inside is like one of those projects. The Last Exorcism maybe as well. Oh, no, The Last Exorcism I don't think is a Blumhouse movie, so strike that. But The Devil Inside was one of those ideas where Paramount, or it may not have been Blumhouse, it was Paramount that was going to create like a budget within their studio that was going to focus exclusively on low-budget horror movies. That didn't quite come to fruition, or if it did, it took a much longer time. But over 7 years, there were 6 Paranormal Activity movies. At less than $30 million to create, they pull in just under $900 million, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And then by the time they get to Part 6, after Ghost Dimension doesn't do quite as well as the others, they're like, let's quit while we're ahead right now. They don't run the series into the ground. This is probably, at The Purge, the second most successful original series that Blumhouse has created. And in between the two series, you have a number of like original hits. You have Sinister, you have Insidious. Sinister, $3 million to create, makes $90 million in theaters. Insidious, $1.5 million to create. It's really a dry run for The Conjuring. Makes over $40 million in North America. And this is all pre-DVD, pre-Blu-ray sales, pre-rights packaging. You have Happy Death Day, Get Out, Split, The Visit, Us, The Invisible Man, and then the Halloween reboot, which that first movie went on to be the most profitable slasher movie of all time. And they focused nearly on genre films. You get, like, I rewatched The Gift recently.
Oh, shoot.
Which was more of a thriller.
Yeah.
It's really good.
It is good.
And I had forgotten the twist of that. Or not really the twist, but the kind of idea
punch.
that Jason Bateman is an asshole the whole movie. And that you really shouldn't be rooting for him at all. And I forgot Rebecca Hall was even in that movie. So that was a delight because she's amazing.
I thought you were talking about the Sam Raimi movie for a second.
Different
and I was
movie.
Very confused.
Different movie. So, but he's really focused on genre films. Despite that, I can't help but notice a lot of backlash against Blumhouse by a lot of genre fans, and a lot of the movies that I'm naming, like, I really like these movies. So sometimes I'm at a bit of a loss as to why there is this backlash. And Ari, you have some thoughts on this, so...
Yeah, well, okay. So I also really like Blumhouse movies a lot, or I tend to. Like Bria Grant's Torn Hearts that came out last year. Oh my god, that was one of my favorite movies of the year, and that's Blumhouse. Jason Blum himself, I think, needs to close his mouth about 10% to 12% more frequently. And I think we would do better. So, I mean, there's always going to be fans who just hate whatever the popular thing is. And if Blumhouse is doing the popular thing and making money and putting out the stuff, some fans are going to be too cool for that. Okay, we set them aside. But then you've got Jason Blum saying all types of crazy stuff. And he's a rich, eccentric guy who's funding all these movies. So, like, he's probably on a power trip. I've not met him. All I can go on is his online personality. And it is hard for me to move past him saying, I don't remember the direct quote, but he was basically...
Oh, I have it.
Yeah, women don't want to direct horror movies or whatnot.
Would you care to read this off?
Yes. Yes.
It is bottom of page 2, I believe.
I promise I looked over the notes before we recorded.
Oh, that's okay.
Page 1.
I barely did. Bottom of page 1, my bad.
So, in his infinite wisdom, Jason Blum famously said, "There are not a lot of female directors, period, and even less who are inclined to do horror. I'm a massive admirer of the Babadook director, Jennifer Kent. I've offered her every movie we've had available. She's turned me down every time." So, first of all, big if true, do you think he really offered every movie to Jennifer Kent? Because I don't believe that.
Also, there are other female directors outside of Jennifer Kent.
You don't say.
I heard he offered Get Out to Jennifer Kent. He's like, thanks, Jordan Peele, but Jennifer's got this.
Could you
As
imagine?
a woman from Australia, that would be amazing.
Oh my God.
I believe that he has offered her projects.
Okay. I don't think every movie, that sounds like hyperbole, but I feel like but she also strikes me as the kind of filmmaker who wants to do something that she believes in and is personal to her. She strikes me as something of an auteur. Yeah. And those people aren't just going to sign up for anything a producer comes to them with. So
she reminds me of a Robert Eggers.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think, I mean, that was crazy. And Jason Blum, I mean, he's going to take forever to live that down, right? But those are the main reasons why I think fans have some trouble with him. But I do like most Blumhouse movies.
Yeah, it was a very unfortunate quote, and it was a very telling quote. He walked it back a day later, and he owned it. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lost art in apologizing, and I think we're often very poor at it. Like, the most typical apology you see is, sorry if my words offended you in somehow, which is not really an apology. It's really saying you're a stupid, weak baby. His apology wasn't that. It was more along the lines of, like, you called me out on this, and you're right to do so. And he talked about a number of his hires that he's had, like a lot of his crew. He said it's about like 50-50 between men and women that work for him. But he went on with his deal with Amazon, because there was the Blumhouse and Amazon partnership where they were releasing a number of movies a year. And I think also through Hulu, where that is where he started to offer a number of like women-fronted or women-identifying directors, like a lot of these movies, but they weren't theatrical releases. So there's a separation there. And he would go on to offer Black Christmas 2019 almost as a rush job, like I have to get something greenlit, to Sofia Takal, which that movie, I know there's a lot of staunch defenders of it, and I'm not saying it's a bad movie, but I'm saying that from the time they were given to write a script, cast it, direct it, edit it, market it, put it in theaters, it's a very good first draft of a movie, but it needed more time to percolate. And I felt like that was a rush job, and not that they set her up to fail, but they were so desperate to get something out into theaters that maybe they could have waited a bit longer.
I'm one of those staunch defenders mostly just, I mean, I agree with everything you said, but mostly just because I want people to give it a chance for what it is. But you're right. I want to see the movie it could have been.
Because, again, a lot of stuff to chew on, and it's not really a remake of Black Christmas at all. It's a much different movie, so good for that reason.
And because that's what I was expecting when I went in, I don't think I had as much fun with it as I probably would have if I didn't have that name recognition in my head. So I need to go back and watch it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole franchise is, or I guess not a franchise, that movie and its subsequent remakes are all very different and very interesting.
Sure. Absolutely. So that's Blumhouse, and I'm sure we'll get more into them, but they're the ones that are kind of like behind this movie, financing it. And again, none of these movies cost, but like this is a $5 million movie that goes on to make close to $100 million in theaters. Like debuts to $34 million its opening weekend in North America. It's like you've already made everything you need to back and then some. So there's no reason to not continue. And what I always find interesting is when a movie like Happy Death Day, the second movie doesn't do as well as the first, but it's still very profitable. And there's a very, like, I think Christopher Landon has a very specific idea as how to close that out, but he can't get it greenlit because it just doesn't have enough cost to profitability. It's a very specific formula that I don't know what it is, but I can't see a third Happy Death Day losing money.
I want to see, and I mentioned this on my own podcast not that long ago, I want to see a crossover between Happy Death Day and Freaky. Like, I want to see that crossover happen.
Yeah.
Like, I think that would be really fun.
Just with like a third Happy Death Day and let it close out. But there we go. That's another.
What if we make the third Happy Death Day the second Freaky?
Yeah, could do that, baby. Possible.
I'd have fun with that.
Possible.
I'd be on board for that.
So, moving right on to The Purge, it's created by James DeMonaco, and he gets the idea from an old Star Trek episode, Return of the Archons. I have never watched an episode of Star Trek.
You're missing out, Mike.
Huge hole in my nerddom and fandom.
Same.
So, is this an episode that you are familiar with, Stephen?
It is not, sadly. No,
What good are you to me right now? You do the Vulcan.
Mike, I've been telling you this for years. I am no good to anybody.
Excellent.
Goodness.
But I'm here anyway, so
Okay.
do with that what you will.
Well, we'll try. I guess we'll try.
That's all you can do, really.
Really?
I mean, I'm here.
So you were saying before I interrupted.
No, I know, particularly the original series. Like, I did not grow up with the original series as much as I did the movies. Like, my dad was a big fan of Star Trek when he was growing up. He was born in 1953, so he would have been like a preteen when Star Trek was coming out. And so he was really into that growing up, really into like sci-fi and stuff. So I was into sci-fi because that's what he was into. Watched, the Star Trek movies. I grew up on, Star Trek 2, 3, 4, to a lesser degree 5. Like, we had, I think, almost the entire franchise like taped off of television onto VHS. So I love Star Trek. Star Trek is my jam, but unfortunately the original series I don't have as much familiarity with because by the time I was a kid, that wasn't in syndication anywhere. Like, my Star Trek is Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. Like, that's what I grew up on.
Okay. And Ari, I think you said the same thing. Huge hole,
Yeah,
right?
I think maybe I've seen one of the newer movies.
Sure.
I don't know anything about Star Trek.
Yeah.
Star Trek rules.
Very similar. I think my wife enjoys like the new episodes and like she's into it. It's just something I've never gotten into. But this particular episode, it's the crew of the Enterprise beaming to a planet that is controlled by a computer called Landru. And it basically is a massive surveillance system that punishes persons for any crime. At 6 p.m. every night, the computer would shut down for maintenance, and the red hour would commence where the planet's citizens would basically go apeshit and commit every atrocity under the sun as a means to cut loose. Okay? So that episode had always stuck with DeMonaco. Now, prior to The Purge, he's a writer on movies like Jack, which I think is a Robin Williams movie. Saw Your Face
Francis
There.
Ford Coppola's Jack.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, dear. The Negotiator, and the Assault on Precinct 13 remake, which stars Ethan Hawke.
Ethan Hawke.
And he talks about his own childhood in an interview where he grew up in Brooklyn. And he's like, look, I'm not a violent person, but I'm pretty comfortable being around the violence. We saw it a lot in our neighborhood. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of other stuff going on. So it never struck him as odd to be around violence. It just was kind of natural growing up. And he says he moves to Paris, and he says he's there for 8 years, and he noticed how different the relationship was to guns and gun culture overseas in Europe than compared to the American experience, where now, like, newborns are given, like, a Colt, basically a Colt 45 to basically suck on as a pacifier when they're born.
I mean, it is a traditional Midwest baby shower gift.
It is, yeah.
It's like offensive
I mean, the
if
latest...
you don't buy it, so...
Right.
It's a huge taboo around here. It really is.
I mean, McDonald's has introduced a Happy Meal with 9mm guns in them for children. It's just...
I mean, baby's first Derringer is a thing.
Right.
Like, it is a very popular toy around here. I don't know how many listeners we have from other parts of the world, but I mean, it happens. It's a
okay,
thing.
but jokes aside...
Wait, we were joking?
But I mean, we're kind of not. Like, I grew up in hunting culture, and so it is... I've never owned a gun. I've never hunted. I grew up in a vegetarian home, but like my extended family and the other people around me were big hunters, and so I'm aware of it. It was like a big deal to get your first gun when you were like, I would say between 6 and 10, for hunting. And so like that is what I thought was normal. And then I started to, like, as an adult, meet people who thought that was very, very strange. So it's, I can't imagine living somewhere else, like in Paris, where people would not have them. I mean, it sounds like it's probably very safe. I don't know.
Much safer, I would say. I would argue much. Yeah, I am the East Coast liberal elitist. I am the person here, and I grew up in a suburban town. There were like no guns around. I do live in a town now in Massachusetts. It's a bit more purplish, like maybe a bit more cranberry in color, where there are like a lot of hunters. There's a lot of hunting culture. There are fish and game clubs. I am not someone that is so anti-gun where I think nobody should have them.
Right.
Like, ban all guns, and if you own a gun, then I'm not someone who necessarily thinks there's a caricature of gun owners where all of them leave them unlocked and let their children juggle with bullets. I would argue that the vast majority of gun owners, like a very, very high percentage of gun owners, want stricter regulation. They want it to be licensed and regulated, much like driving an automobile would be, that they are able to lock up their weapons, that they are able to safely store them, and that they teach their children proper handling of these weapons and give it the respect, and teach them to give it the respect that it's due, like how dangerous it can be. That would be about 95%, maybe even higher, like 98% of the persons that own guns. It's unfortunate that 2% tends to be the loudest, and B, that's still a lot of persons.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And with, it's not too difficult to get them, so you can just decide to do that all of a sudden. Whereas, like, someone who grew up in hunting culture and was taught gun safety protocols and does have a really safe way to store them and understands that's a different whole vibe. So I'm with you on that, Mike.
Yeah. So I don't want to see the whole, like, oh, they hate guns. Like, no, not necessarily. It's not that, but I just think that there needs to be realistic and real conversations about, okay, how do we keep them out of the wrong person's hands? And I don't want to hear it's a constitutional right, because that's just stupid.
The Constitution was meant to be amended and ratified, so it can be changed for any reason at any time. So let's not use that as a crutch, please and thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, all that goes to say it starts to that experience living overseas starts to kind of change the way that DeMonico looks at his relationship to violence and the American relationship to violence. There's a near car accident that he and his wife are in that inspire the idea of having one night with no rules. And I have a little quote here from an article I believe was on IndieWire where he says, this is around the time he's talking about the third movie, and he talks about what inspired the first film. He says, "My wife and I were in a road rage incident in Brooklyn where we were cut off by this drunk guy who almost killed us. Cops showed up. It was crazy. She said in anger, and this is a doctor who helps people, I wish we could all have one free one a year." And I was like, whoa, honey, and it stayed with me. And that's a powerful thing, right? I mean, I'll ask you both. I mean, we're not free of our impulses from that, right?
Not at all.
It's about, managing them and controlling them. Like, that's kindergarten.
Right. That's impulse control. That's the name of the game. And I think, the more we as a society veer away from our willingness to control those impulses, I think the more dangerous we become in general. And I think that this movie does a really good job of kind of pinpointing that. Like, you control your impulses, but one night a year, fuck it, out the window. Impulse control be damned. Do what you want.
It's like a cheat day.
Do what you feel. It is. Yeah, the ultimate cheat day, in a really terrifying way. And I think this movie really does a good job of exploring the horror and again, it's a micro budget movie, so it's kind of on a very micro scale, but we're able to really, for this one family specifically, dig into the horror of just that concept. Even if you're doing everything right, even if you're saying everything you're supposed to be saying, one act of humanity puts you in the crosshairs of very dangerous people unwilling to control their own impulses. And you pull up at a stoplight and you see the person panhandling, and you see their bag, and you're like, I could probably grab that bag when the light turns green, and they'd never know. Like, I would never do that, but like you entertain the thought for half a second, and you're like, damn, I'm fucked up. Like, I would never do that. I cannot make that clear enough. I would not do that. But like, could I get away with it?
I think you're denying it a little bit too much. I think you're denying
methinks I does protest too much. Yeah. But no, I mean, everybody has thoughts like that you allow yourself to entertain for half a second before you're like, no. Because at the end of the day, as a certain subset of fans are very fond of saying, we live in a society.
Well, to quote George Costanza, one of the great political philosophers, we're living in a society, people.
That's it. And yeah, and that at the end of the day, that's what it is. And the idea that, and again, the backstory of this is really fascinating to me, which is why I'm excited to dig into this franchise a little more. But how does society progress to a point where this becomes the way, this complete dissolution of society one day a year? How does that become the way that which we perpetuate that society? Like, I find that contradiction really fascinating.
And to me too, it's this idea of like, well, the other three, what I haven't seen these movies wrestle with is the psychological aftermath of the day after. It would be kind of fascinating to see a day after movie where you have to kind of wrestle and grapple with like what you did on the night of the purge, or if you were somehow victimized by it, how you recover from the effects of that, and why. Because if there's someone that's perpetuating violence, then someone is going to be the victim of violence, whether it's directly or indirectly. Why would this remain such a popular activity for so long? Because I think by this movie, it's the sixth one, and it seems to be growing in popularity. So it's going to be fascinating. I would like to see maybe, well, what happens after the fact.
And how, I mean, because again, even for this movie, how do any of these neighbors look each other in the eye again after what happens on this night? You know, like, they went in with a plan, and when that unexpected element, pretty much ruins their plan, like, they all have to live with each other, not just with themselves, but with each other after this. They've seen each other at their lowest points, and how does someone's moving? That's all I know. At least someone's moving.
If you're Mrs. Sandon at the end of The Purge, how many days before your house is on the market?
Yeah, right. 0, like a half a day. Yeah. You're posting that listing as soon as humanly possible.
Yep. Slightly used security system. It's pretty good.
It works 99% of the time.
Yes.
It's not built for worst case scenario, but we'll leave that off the listing.
Right.
And Mike, you said you haven't seen the second or third one yet, right?
I have not yet.
Those are 2 of my favorites, and I think you will get into that a little bit when you watch those.
Excellent.
Can I just say, Ari, my favorite, because I listened to all the Phantasm episodes, and I absolutely loved your commentary on all of them. My favorite dynamic that you bring to this is the whole, Mike, get ready for these movies you've not seen yet. Like, just kind of prepping him. And I'm like, as someone who's not seen these either, I'm like, ooh, what?
Excellent.
I'm getting all excited too. Like, I love that dynamic. I'm meeting you for the first time tonight. I just want to let you know how big a fan I am of what you did on those episodes. Absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you so much. My ears are turning red.
What we've done is, I like having Ari on so much, is I just picked franchises that she likes. So
that's
true. She doesn't know that she's like part of the crew at this point. She's like,
she's a ringer now.
I elbowed my way in. I said, do Saw, do The Purge, do Wrong Turn. Hi, I'm here now.
And me, I'm sitting here going, Exorcist when? And he's like, we'll get there.
We'll get there.
Calm down.
The amount of research I'm going to have to. We you know what? Did we talk about this when we did Disenfranchised the other night? Weren't we having this very conversation?
We had a fraction of this conversation, Because, but I'm a Friedkin fanboy, so.
I would probably start my research for that series about 6 months before we do the movies, because the first movie itself would be a 2-parter. One on the making of, and then one dissecting the movie. Then you get into part 2, which is such a train wreck of a movie that's also probably going to be just fun to talk about.
Right. The whole John Borman, I missed the boat, let me get in on this. Oh, wait, what am I doing?
And then there are 2 part 4s. So you have to do each of those on their own. Legion deserves a pretty huge... And I think you have to talk at least the first season of the TV series, because it really is a direct sequel to The Exorcist, so that might have to be Patreon. It's a direct sequel to the first, and it's really good. And then there's going to be the David Gordon Green Exorcist. So we got to time this. So we'll get there. It's one of the big ones. It's a bit intimidating.
It is.
It's one of the series like that. And, I'm already doing prep for Psycho, and I don't even know when we're going to do it. But I'm like reading everything I can on Hitchcock right now.
I am very excited to get into those sequels because I have been told that they are good, actually.
I've never seen the Psycho sequels either, so...
I know Brian Kuiper stands for the sequels, and my friend Tucker, I said an unkind word about them on an episode of my own podcast, and he's now our co-host, but he got all up in my business about it. So
Psycho 2 is a minor miracle.
I've heard that, and I've never watched it.
It's a minor miracle. So
I'm going to hold off, and I'm going to watch them with the rest of the crew when we do that franchise, but I'm excited to do that franchise for sure.
3 is a pretty straightforward slasher movie, and I've never seen 4. Okay, we're getting a little...
Before we go back to The Purge, I just want to say, did you see Scream Factory announced, I think just today, that they're doing a 4K of Exorcist 3?
Ooh.
I just saw it today.
I want
Scream Factory needs to stop putting things out because my wallet can't take it.
Right.
Correct.
So I have the Scream Factory Exorcist 3 Blu-ray.
Me too, with the Legion cut. And it's really cool. So
it really is.
Now I'm going to buy the 4K, I guess. Anyway, sorry.
I mean, you kind of have to.
End up buying Texas Chainsaw Massacre for like the 80th
Yeah,
time
how many
because
copies? Just a whole shelf of them. Anyway.
That's pretty much it.
Sorry.
All right. I do want to mention one more like background thing about The Purge before we get more into the movie here. So there is a historical precedent for it. And there actually are a few different things, but this is the one that jumped out. It is called Saturnalia. And it was a Roman pagan festival that was celebrated for a week, meaning because we're just a bunch of weaklings as Americans, we could give it one day. The Romans are like, we can do this shit for a week, baby. December 17th to December 25th, keep that last date in mind. And it was a week where the courts were closed and no one could be punished for property damage or injuring other persons. And the Roman authorities would choose one enemy of the people to represent the Lord of Misrule. And he or she would be forced basically for a week to indulge in hedonism. Like, they would be force-fed all sorts of rich foods, all sorts of sweets. They would have all sorts of, like, sexual trysts for a week. And they would live, pretty hedonistic life. But then at the end of that week, they were ritually sacrificed. So that would be the downside. Like, all the ice cream you can eat. But
at the end, you die. That is the definition of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Oh, shoot. It really is.
Yep. So during the 4th century, Christianity is having some trouble converting some of the Roman pagans over to their religion. So they're like, you know what if we appropriate this festival as our own little recruitment tool and say, like, look, if you want to be Christian, you can have 1 week to do whatever the fuck you want. And it will be this week. Sure, go ahead. And they promise the pagans, if you convert, you can still enjoy this tradition. And, someone higher up, like a middle manager, probably steps up at a papal meeting and says, like, it's cool and all to have these, like, orgies and, murder sprees, but kind of goes against the tenets of the religion. We really need to kind of rein it back in. And that is when the 25th is named, like, the birth date of Christ. Like, that's where, so it was, like, all in leading up to the, quote, birth of Christ, the Savior, as the Redeemer. So I found that, like, kind of like a really fascinating historical precedent for these things.
As someone who comes from the Christian tradition and has studied a lot of the history of the tradition, and I love that when the Romans kind of, like, took over the world from the Greeks, they were just like, look, we're not going to try to, like, force you guys to do so. Just follow us, pay your taxes, believe whatever you want. You worship these Greek gods, fine. We'll just rename them. They have Roman names now, but it's the same gods. Go ahead and worship those. And then Christianity does the exact same thing. After the Holy Roman Empire becomes a thing, it's just like, look, I don't know. You celebrate a holiday here. I don't know. It's Jesus's birthday now. I don't know. Do what you want. Like, it very much that same, like, lazy, I don't know, fuck it kind of vibe. That I, as a lazy individual, I'm like, I can get behind that. I can dig that.
I'll say, as a recruitment tool, there are definitely worse things than, like, do whatever you want for at least 1 week.
Now we call it Fat Tuesday, and it's a precursor to Lent, and it's coming up.
Yes.
That's true. That is true. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the other psychological and economic impacts of, like, what a real purge would do. But we're going to hold off on that for a minute, and I want to ask, let's dive into the movie first. Let's talk about this and then come back to it. What I found really fascinating, and it stuck with me, is, like, the opening crawl to the movie. It talks about the premise that it's 2022, unemployment is at 1%, crime rates are historically low, and the reason for that is attributed to this purge, which is 1 night a year where it's a free-for-all. And then after it lays out the what the movie's about, there's a crawl. Blessed be the new founding fathers for letting us purge and cleanse our souls. Blessed be America, a nation reborn. And that stuck with me. And I'm not a very religious person. I believe in something. I do believe in the separation of church and state. But what this creed does is it removes God from it. You no longer have one nation under God. And if you're not religious, you can say there's a higher power, like believing in something bigger than yourself in this universe. It doesn't necessarily a Christian God, but this is removed, and now you're pledging fealty to a political party, in this case, the new founding fathers, which I feel are based upon the Tea Party, which emerged in 2009, 2010. I mean, you can draw a through line. It's like not even a thinly veiled representation. It's like, this is who
God,
it is.
remember that simpler time?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
I know. The fact that it is a simpler
Isn't
time
that
just
fucked
is. It's really
Yeah.
fucked up. Yeah, it is. Ari,
Feel free to edit that out, Mike, if you...
No,
Okay.
keep that stays in. I think we're all on the same page when we think about the Helicon days where it was just a bunch of weirdos dressed up like in Tea Party suits, screaming at town hall meetings, but not actually trying to overthrow the government.
I was teaching in Christian schools at that time
Goodness.
too, so the government teachers were all, very excited about this new political movement happening, and I'm sitting there going, guys,
This seems
do you know what we're talking
bad.
about here?
Mhm.
Like, I don't like this. I think one thing that I noticed on this rewatch of the movie is that opening crawl becomes the mantra. It becomes almost a prayer. America is the deity, which again, based on the level of, I don't even want to call it patriotism. I'll just call it what it is. It's jingoism. Based on the level of jingoism exhibited by the far right, and having most of those being the evangelical right, there is this sort of blurring of the line between what it is to be an American and what it is to be religious. And they kind of become the same thing. So there is this almost religious devotion to this American ideal without really fully understanding what it is. And that's also kind of rooted in this idea of being, Christian, not really understanding what that is either, because you don't really read the book. You just listen to what your pastor tells you every Sunday, and you count on them to actually know what they're talking about, and they don't. Like it's a trickle down fucked up is what it is. And that's the kind of trickle down that works, is the trickle down fucked up. And it's based on this kind of religious illiteracy, this governmental illiteracy. Like there's just this blanket, as a post-literate society, we're illiterate when it comes to kind of the foundations of how this shit works. And so there's this kind of misguided idealism in a way that comes with this almost religious fervor. And so there is kind of no difference between like American patriotism and like radical American jingoism, honestly, and the religion based around it. I know people talk about the cult of Trump a lot, and that's really kind of where I think a lot of it takes root, and where something like this seems less far-fetched now than it did in 2013, where you're like, oh my God, can you imagine something like that? And now you're just like, I mean, if they announced it tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
Like it's just kind of, that's kind of how we've progressed over the course of the last 10 years since this movie came out.
Yeah. That was so much better than what I was going to say. I was just going to say it reminded me of saying the Pledge of Allegiance in class growing up. I don't know if you guys had to do that, but yeah,
we did.
I definitely had to say the Pledge of Allegiance growing up, and I never thought about what it meant. It was just sort of like, you do the stuff, you do the thing, you get to sit down, you get to start your day. And you do it at the start of the day, so we're like all just like kind of settling in and not really paying attention. I mean, at least I wasn't. I don't think other kids were. When you're little, you just do what your teacher says. I mean, I always did. So
I always thought it was like a law. I always thought it was something we had to do. Like this is just something. And I went to a school where we didn't do it every day, but we did it once a week. And so when I visited a school where it was done every day, I was like, this is weird. Like it struck me as weird because it wasn't what I was used to, but everyone around me is just like, oh no, it's just what we do.
Now I think it's weird. Like, especially because I've studied the history of the Pledge of Allegiance, and it gets weird. So that's what the crawl at the beginning
Weird
reminded me of. Okay, I feel like I'm gonna get it wrong because I don't have it in front of me, but I feel like it ties back to Nazis. So
I mean, that wouldn't surprise
I don't,
me.
and now I'm like, oh, I don't want to say something wrong on the podcast. So, like, maybe Google it and, come for me if I'm wrong. But I feel like it has its roots in Nazi stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that if we look at rituals in other countries where, like, there's, like, school children pledging fealty to, like, a leader, per se, we would look at that from the outside and say, that seems really weird and odd. And, like, that is, like... But when it's here in our own country, we're like, no, this is just something we do. I also, like, never gave it a thought, like, why... As a child, like, you would just stand up, you would say this quick little thing, and then you would have, like, your milk and crackers and go about your day. Like, there was no thought being given in. And I know when I was growing up, like, nobody would object to standing up. And I do think there is more of that now where kids are, especially as parents, we're like, look, if you don't want to stand for that, my wife is vehemently against the pledge, and I lean more towards her. We've told our daughter, like, if you don't want to stand for it, you don't have to stand for it. Like, that's totally your own
They still
choice
do
and
it
decision.
in school?
Yeah, they still do it. They do. Some schools still do it. Our school that I work for, I don't think the kids stand for it and do it, but it's played over the morning announcements every single day.
Okay.
But we've told our daughter if they do offer it, you don't have to. But you think of, like, one of the... In a lot of what we see politically in this country right now, like, it's culture war bullshit that is meant to further divide us and further distract us from problems that are very challenging and very difficult to solve.
Yes.
And Stephen, I think you hit it when you said, like, we're a post-literate society because we lack a lot of, like, in-depth critical thinking skills at times and want answers spoon-fed to us and want the easiest possible answer. It's much easier to run up and focus on issues that might evoke a very emotional reaction in us rather than having to tackle things that feel existential in their nature, like how do we tackle the climate crisis? How do we tackle, the energy grid problems that we have? How do we tackle economic, racial, and gender inequality? They're not easy answers. There's something that takes a lot of time and effort and energy to solve, and you need to hear from a lot of different persons who opinions range across a whole spectrum of ideologies. And who has time for that when it's much easier to say, those sons of bitches are kneeling for the national anthem. How dare they? And that becomes, like, a very easy point to make, and now you can clearly have persons on either side of that. There's not a lot of gray area when it comes to a debate like that. And we saw, especially and this won't be a Donald Trump podcast for 5 episodes, but I do feel like it's very interesting that, like, the rise of MAGA and Trumpism tied so closely to this time period as well, where it does, these movies feel very prescient. And in the later movies, you see with the first Purge, and you tied directly into MAGAism, and with the Forever Purge, you see it tied directly into migration policies that were enacted in the 2018, 2019, 2020. So it's kind of impossible to not talk about those things. So.
Right.
So, yeah, I just found, like, it was interesting to see this, like, we're going to say fealty to this political party, and you think, well, that will never happen. And 3 years later, you have, and part of it is there's the sunken cost psychological effect, where if you're a person who has invested a lot of time and energy in becoming a MAGA, in following Donald Trump, at a certain point, it becomes very difficult psychologically to admit, oh, I was wrong about this. This is a bad person or a bad ideology, because then you have to backtrack and look at all of your decisions that have led up to it. So it becomes kind of like a comfort blanket to dig your heels in and say, no, I am riding this wave of thought wherever it's going to carry me, because to do so otherwise would take a lot of self-reflection I'm just not capable of.
I mean, and even from a religious standpoint, there's this, at least from the Christian perspective, there's this idea that if everyone around me is against it, then it must be the right thing to do, because the thing that's popular is not always right. And it, as someone who used to teach the book, it always really frustrated me that there were so many people who were, when I was in college, a fellow student of mine said about another student, that guy's not even a Christian, he's just a Republican. And there has not been a week that's gone by since 2016 where I've not thought about that. Mm-hmm. Just the idea, the notion that, well, we're a Christian, so we vote Republican, and this is what the Republican Party is doing, so this must be what we need to do. And even when you open the book and be like, no, this is wrong for all these reasons, you're just like, I tried to talk to my parents about this, and my mom's just like, well, we need to make sure there's more conservative justices on the Supreme Court. And I'm like, but do we? Mm-hmm. Is that worth it, really? That was not a fun conversation to have. I got very mad at my parents in a public setting, and I was definitely yelling. It was not fun. But I mean, that's kind of the reality for it. Like, there's this idea of there's a persecution complex built into Christianity based on the fact that it was written to the later half of the text is written to a group of people who are under persecution. So there's this whole notion that, well, if we're being persecuted, we're doing the right thing. And that's not always the case, guys. I'm sorry.
You know what's funny? I'm like, we'll do this one in a tight 90. Like this one, like, will we even get to 90? No, it's my fault, as per usual, which is not even my fault. Like, I enjoy talking about movies, so it's not even.
No, I mean,
I always feel bad.
I'm loving this.
Yeah, I'm like, am I bogarting my co-host time?
You get the religious-y guy on to talk about this shit, and he's gonna have some thoughts.
I'm awesome. Good with it. Here's the other thought I had. We're still in the opening credits, folks. Watching the opening credits of these movies, like, you actually do see the Purge in action, and there's like some really harrowing footage there. Like, props to Monica, because like a lot of it looks like surveillance footage. It looks real. Yeah. Which it looks like, I mean, you're like, where are they pulling this like stock footage from?
Right.
Was your assumption when you watch that this is what like the bulk of the movie would be? Not necessarily the camera footage or surveillance camera footage, but you were going to be watching like a jumping from place to place and watching the Purge unfold from multiple point of views. And if it was your point of view, were you disappointed when that wasn't, when it ended up being much more of a bottle movie?
I mean, I came to it so late that I kind of knew what it was going to be, so I wasn't disappointed because I didn't have that expectation, but I totally could see that being the case if you go in with no knowledge of what it's going to be and it starts with that.
Yeah, exactly the same. I think what it's intended to do, and again, whether or not this is setting an incorrect expectation or not, I'll leave to others to discuss, but I think what it actually succeeds in doing is building the world. Mm-hmm. So you're like, this is, you've told me what the Purge is. Now I get to actually see past instances of the Purge as it's folded out over the course of the last 5 years. And so now I get to see what it actually, looked like leading up to this year. And now that I have a context for what that is and the kind of violence and the kind of atrocities that are permissible and forgivable and perfectly legal, now I'm in the right headspace to understand what this story, what the level of violence that this story is going to be dealing with and engaging with. So I guess that's how I kind of looked at it.
Got it. Okay. I think I came from it like thinking that, like, I know it would focus on Ethan Hawke and his family, but thought we would see a bigger world. And again, it's been like a decade since I first watched the movie, so it's a little bit difficult to remember how I felt about this, but I feel like I remember coming away from it a little bit disappointed that it was so focused on this one family, and feeling like I wanted more of those opening moments. I wanted more things like that throughout the movie to kind of pop in, but then found like in the later two movies I watched where it is a bit more of that, where it does jump, and the television show as well. The television show tries to show this event from multiple points of view, that I'm like, actually, I do think I prefer the smaller, more scaled back version of it where we can focus on just one family. Because I think where this movie is really effective is that first 25 minutes of the movie, everything leading up to the son seeing the soldier running away, trying to escape and crying for help, where you have this like very surreal juxtaposition of a family, very wealthy, well-to-do family, enjoying a family dinner and having like your typical family issues, like the kids are cursing at the table and the daughter is sneaking her boyfriend in who's not accepted by mom and dad, and there's a bit of tension between mom and dad because dad's a bit of a, like, everybody look at me and what I do. That kind of like typical family problem versus the underlying fear that, okay, something very bad could possibly go down tonight. That tension of knowing what's going to come as soon as those sirens hit.
Yeah, I love the start of the movie because it's like, it's coming, and then they're in the middle of dinner, and I think it's Charlie who goes, "Look what time it is," and it's like 4 minutes to 7, and they're kind of like, okay, we gotta huddle up and like go watch the announcement or whatever. And it felt really scary to me in that moment because they sort of know what's coming, but it kind of reminded me of like when the tornado sirens go off and you're like, okay, drop whatever you're doing and go downstairs. But like they knew it was coming all day, so they've just been like sitting with that leading up to it.
Yeah, and again, I think it's more of that great world building. Like we've now seen the larger, broader world, and now we're now taking a more in-depth and kind of incisive look into where the rest of our story is going to focus, and what does a normal day look like for them, leading up to this event that we've been promised is going to be this kind of horrific free for all. And so it's good to see what their normal life is like, because then we know exactly to what extent it can and will be disrupted as a result of this one evening. Which again, I find all of that very, particularly the shit with the neighbors is the stuff that I'm just like I'm the whole movie I'm thinking, and I forget about the neighbors until they show up at the end, and then I'm like, oh, but they are help. Oh no, like that whole thing. Like I think that's going to be the movie. The neighbors trying to take the house, and then it goes off in a completely different direction. I completely forget about the neighbors, and the neighbors circle back, and you're like, oh, even still they're helping. Oh no, they're not helping. Oh shit. And it's exactly the thing I thought was going to happen the whole time that I forgot about. Like this movie's so great. Like it sets up the pieces and then just knocks all those dominoes down. And it's really phenomenal to watch it happen.
I agree. And I was just thinking, with the anticipation of what's to come, the only thing I could liken it to recently, about 2 weeks ago, we had that near historic cold front that hit most of the country. And where I am from, we were getting, it gets cold here in the winter, but it doesn't get that cold, where you're looking at like -20, -30 degrees. And we had a good 5 or 6 days of anticipation of knowing it was going to be that cold for 2 days. And I just remember in the lead up to it thinking like, will we have school the day before, or will I actually get an off day without a snow day? And like thinking about that over and over. And what will I do on that day? Like, will we throw out extra blankets? Will I just watch movies? What, do we have enough food this week? And just what is it going to be like to be in this level of cold? And then it comes and you're like, okay, now we're in the middle of it right now. What it would be like anticipating like that right before the run up in the days before. Okay, what violence could break out in this area right now? Will it be my neighbors? Will somebody try to break in? Will someone I know or love be affected by this? And what that anticipation might be like and how that might weigh on someone psychologically. What do we both all think of this idea? Because this movie, the focus on the Sandin family is they are a very well-to-do, like they're 1%ers. So we are watching the events unfold from the perspective of a very well-to-do, very well-off family that we're asked to root for. And I the idea, I guess, is supposed to be this could happen to anybody. Like, nobody is going to be untouched by this violence. But we also live in an era now where, like, I have posted guillotine gifs. I have definitely yelled, "Eat the rich." And I found it not impossible to, because I don't think they're an unlikable family. And I think that, like, Ethan Hawke's character works pretty hard for the fit life that he's built, though it's probably pretty easy to sell security systems. You know, that's pretty good gig
in the world
to
of the
have.
Purge. Yeah,
Pretty good gig to have.
doesn't seem difficult,
Right.
But once you
What do
sell
we
them
think-
to all the houses who need them, then what do you do? That's what I was thinking about. Like, this is going to fall off at some point, but,
Upgrades.
oh, I guess. See, that's why I'm
Yeah.
not in business, because I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how any of it works. I just know, look, there's always a market for this
guess.
shit.
We-
right?
Subscription!
We just-
Make them feel unsafe. And here's the thing. They broke into this house where that had these security systems. So now upgrades are essential, because you better believe that story is getting out. You better believe people are going to hear about that. Like, he's gone, so unfortunately it's not going to be him, but someone else at his firm, you better believe that they're going to be, like, farming upgrades out and you know, designing a safer system and getting those on the market before
And
next
that's
year.
why
Like, you know that's going to happen.
that's why this episode is brought to you by Simply Safe.
Mike, read that ad copy real quick.
We just literally had this evening. My wife booked, and it's the one day I left my phone in my car, because I would have been like, please don't have them come tonight. It's Friday. Our house is a mess, and we're both very tired after a long week. We had someone come we didn't have booked to quote us, like, we need to replace our windows at some point in the next year. We know it. And a piece of the vinyl siding has come off the house, so we need to replace that one strip. So he came and gave us a quote that is more than I have in my daughter's college fund right now. Like, it would pay
Windows
for
are ridiculous right now.
They are.
But it was like, our house is a modest middle class home. Like, we, you know, not a fixer upper, but close to it. And this guy comes in, and he wouldn't get off his pitch. I'm like, look, just give me a price. I don't need a pitch. I'm exhausted. I'm not listening to a word you're saying to me right now. All I know is I know I need new windows. We know it. That's why we called you. He goes, well, I have to tell you why. And I'm like, okay, I am going to ignore. I go, I guess that's what you're going to do. I'm just going to go cook dinner. And he gave us a price where I'm like, just almost started to laugh. I'm like, dude, do you look where you are right now? Like, what are you thinking? Like, he's like, well, the average window is like $600, but we're way above the average. Oh, great. Fantastic.
Cool. Can you give me the number of the people who do the average, or
Yes.
even better, below
Yeah,
average,
Give me
maybe?
below
We're
average
like-
Windows Inc. That's who I'm going.
He's like,
Yeah.
and he
Subpar
was like-
Windows Incorporated. Yes,
he's like, but
please.
you don't want to go to like a Lowe's or a Home Depot because like it won't be any difference at all. I'm like, wait a minute. So I desperately need to replace my windows, or my house might collapse, is what you're saying. But if I replace them with new ones that aren't yours, it won't make a difference at all. Like, which one is it, dude? And then they wouldn't replace one strip of siding. It was going to be like the whole
Oh,
house.
for goodness
and I'm like,
sake! You know
I
they
just
don't need
need this
to do
one.
that.
It was like $10,000, and I'm like, for just that, and I'm like, so $9,800 for one strip of siding? They're like, no, we have to do all this. I'm like, yeah, we're not doing that, dude. We're
Here's
not.
the thing. You don't, though. You
You
really
don't.
don't.
You
So
know.
it was a near purge situation, except it had to do with windows, like double pane windows.
Did you tell us what your purge crime would be? Because I think it should be stealing windows.
It would be stealing.
Or at least vinyl siding.
Yeah, why not both, man? You got 12 hours.
I mean, part of me is like,
Touche.
I would knock off an ATM and just bankroll it for my daughter's education, like it'd pay for all of her college, and she'd have no
Oh,
loans.
that's lovely.
That's like the nice part of it. The other part, I do work in a K through 8 school as a counselor, and there are some dumb children. There's like definitely a 6th grader today. I said, someone's going to punch you soon, and I am going to lobby for that kid to get a pass because you're an awful kid. Something to that, because he's just a bully.
I mean,
And-
I've thought it a lot. I've never actually said it to a kid.
it takes a lot for me to get. And again, I am the kind, cuddly counselor that everyone comes to, because 99.9% of the time, I am that cuddly person. But this kid was like, he called a kid stinky and then pretended to faint when this when he walked by him.
It's
and
rude.
I'm like, no, it's super
Uncool.
rude. And this is like not the first time.
If you told
Anyway.
me, Mike, if you told me I deserved to be punched, I would believe it. Like, that's who you are. Like, you could take a person's heart out and show it to them. That's what I think.
I don't think you deserve that,
Well-
though. I think you deserve to be listened to and respected.
Well, thank you, but I'm just saying, I trust you. And so if you...
I, on the other hand,
Stephen I like a lot, too. Everyone on this show is aces as far as I'm concerned. So
otherwise we wouldn't be here,
you
right?
would not be
You
here.
don't invite punchable people to the show.
I try not to. I really do try to go out of my way to like kind of curate the people that we speak to and work with. Because I
That
think
being said, he's got some stories off mic.
do we? I actually
I
have
don't
some.
I don't know. I'm just saying.
I do have some. But by and large, like it's been a very chill group of people to work with, which is really nice. So this was a long way to ask, what do we think of the idea of focusing on this 1%er family? And is it harder to empathize with them now?
I think on some level it is, but what I think this movie does very well is it kind of peels back everything and shows you the bare humanity on every level. And I mean, for all of its good and all of its evil, like it just kind of lays everything bare. Like, again, it's an act of humanity that even gets them in the crosshairs of the Purgers anyway. Like, so you see the good of it. And you see the fact that they're willing to do something terrible. It's that decision. Like, how far were you willing to go to protect your family? And they're willing to give this man over to certain death. And for his part, he's like, you got to do what you got to do for your kids. Like, I understand. Like, hand me over. And at that point, he doesn't want to anymore. And so you see these people become decent and become human. And that's kind of when everything is legal. The one radical revolutionary act is just being a decent fucking human.
Legal and
just
moral.
Showing compassion.
The difference between something being legal and something being moral and ethical are
That's
two
it.
different things, or completely different arguments.
Yeah. And I think that's what this movie does really well is I think at the beginning you're like, how do I empathize with these, rich post yuppies? And by the end of the movie, like you do, you're on their side because you've fucking been in the shit with them for the last 90 minutes, right? Yeah. Or like 85 minutes or however long this movie is. Like, yeah, you've been in the shit and you're willing to come along with them. Yeah.
Because I don't think James is a flim-flam artist. Like, I don't think he's someone that is out there selling... Like, I don't get the impression that he's selling security systems that he knows aren't going to work. Like, he's just very honest. Like, look, they're a deterrent. And you see, if you're a criminal or you're someone that wants to get in somewhere, if you see some sort of halfway decent security system, unless you're absolutely determined to get in there, you're going to move on to a much easier target. And to bring up kind of like what we call Alice training, which we do in schools now, it's why they talk about like barricading doors and moving as far away from them. Because any sort of give or any sort of like pushback where someone can't get into the room, well, there's like 100 other doors. I'll try one of those. Grim fucking thing to say, I know, but it's why we kind of like talk about it. You're going to go somewhere where there's less resistance. There's like, sure, like plenty of security here, but where there's a will, there's a way. There's like always something that could be done. Nothing is going to be like, it's not Fort Knox at the end of the day. It's a home system, not Fort Knox, right? So I don't think he's like this. Like, I don't think he's selling magic beans, is what I mean to say.
Right.
What
agree.
you mentioned the dilemma that the family faces. Like, do we give up this person, or do we potentially all die because it's the right thing to do? What do we think of this moral dilemma at the center of the movie? Like, what would you do in a situation like this?
Dude, this is the most, like, fucked up version of the trolley problem. And I've never done well with the trolley problem. I don't know. Like, so loyalty is really important to me. And so I feel like I would do anything for the people that I love. So part of me is like, yeah, I would throw a stranger to the wolves for my family. But then also part of me is disgusted for even considering that. So, I mean, I definitely feel for the family in this movie, and I do empathize with them because, like, you know, the kid, Charlie, lets in the bloody stranger, the soldier, and he's just trying to do the right thing. He's a little kid. He doesn't know. And now his parents are stuck cleaning up his actions, which is totally how it is when you're a parent. You clean it up after your kid's dumb actions. Same with the daughter. We'll get into that. And, like, earlier in the movie, they're talking to him about, like, well, we don't participate because we don't want to. And it's, like, this question of, like, well, you know, Charlie's asking without asking, like, is it okay to participate in the Purge? And they don't really give him an answer. Right. So I have no idea what I do. I feel like, first of all, I wouldn't be in the super secure house. I can tell you that for free because I wouldn't have any money. Right. So, I don't know. That's a non-answer, but it's honest.
I mean, I would like to think that I would do the right thing, but I also, again, if I've established one thing on this episode, it is that I am a coward. And I would probably do something horribly cowardly, if I'm being really honest with myself. Do I like that about myself? No, but that's, I mean, and again, that's the dilemma. Like, and it's a Kobayashi Maru to reference a franchise that neither of you are that familiar with, Star Trek.
But I know that thing. I'm with you.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
You know, well, at least you know the Kobayashi Maru. That's
I have no idea.
That's like 20%. It's a classic no-win scenario.
I thought you meant Kobayashi, like
the hot dog eater
contest eating person. Yeah.
No, actually, I was talking about the Pete Postlethwaite's character from The Usual Suspects. Okay. No. But no, the Kobayashi Maru is the no-win situation. It's the no-win scenario, and it's a training exercise in Starfleet Academy, so that people who are in command training know that there are some situations that are unwinnable, and that's what this is. Like, it's a no-win situation. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But either way, you're damned. Yeah. And the minute you do that very human, altruistic thing of letting this person in desperate need of assistance, as soon as you let them into your home, you have invited the no-win situation. You have invited that upon yourself. And because Charlie does this now, this is the decision that Ethan Hawke is forced to make for his family. And I think the entire movie then folds out of the consequences of that one act of humanity, which is, again, that's the most revolutionary thing that you can do in the midst when everything's legal. Decency is the ultimate sin.
Yeah. In a vacuum, I know that, like, my daughter's life is not inherently worth more than a stranger's life. Like, all things being equal, removing myself from the equation, those two lives are equal lives. But I don't live in a vacuum. I live in a world where there are people that I love, that are people that I'm close with, that are people that I'm tasked to care for and to raise, and you know that I don't know what I would do without. So in a situation where it's like, do I choose my daughter or this stranger? I think it would not be a difficult decision to be like, I am sorry, but, and I could justify that from, like, I don't know what it would be like to not be without that person. If that makes me inherently a worse person, then yeah, I understand that. I do think I would probably try to find a alternative, which is, hey, you seem like you might know how to handle a handgun. We are loaded for bear here. Why don't we take these fuckers out? Let's try that route. If that might be the route we have to go, that might be the route we would try. That being said, like, I've never handled anything more deadly than a steak knife. And a sharp tongue. Like, those are my two weapons of choice. So I don't know how useful I would be. But I think that, like, if I had to choose one or the other, I'd always choose my family over the other. Now, my wife might not. My wife is famous for asking if the life insurance is up to date.
I mean, that's just practical at that point, you know? Someone has to make sure the paperwork's in order.
She also takes notes during true crime shows.
Well, you better not fuck up.
Just saying. Just like, oh, please. Like, she could do better than this. I joke. I want to ask about Henry a little bit, because I don't know what his end game here. And I think this gets to like that question I was asking about earlier, like, what about the next day? Like, Henry, unbeknownst to his girlfriend Zoe, is not going to go and say, like, here's why I think you should let me date your daughter, but he's going to just try to cut out the middleman and be like, I'm going to kill your dad and then we can date happily. What does he think is going to happen? Like, what does he think the next day is going to look like when it's 7 a.m. and the purge is over? I just don't get this. Like, you can cut him from this movie completely and nothing changes.
That would require forethought on his part, and I don't think this is the kind of person who thinks things through. Like, we get the idea that he's significantly older. Like, he's probably a college student dating a high schooler. So there's probably some significant age difference there. Like, he even does the "you're so mature for your age" kind of thing, and he says that to her, and I'm just like, oh,
it's the reddest flag.
In this like movie full of red flags, like the biggest ones are flying off of Henry in those moments. Yeah. Like,
Ariel, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Feel free.
But has anyone ever used that line with you?
Most definitely.
Okay. Oh. And how did that line go over?
It went over great, because when you're a teenager, you don't have good sense. Okay. Nothing gets, sorry, Mom, if you're listening to this, but like, it worked, like, it's meant to trick you, and it does, because you're a teenage girl and you don't have good sense.
Excellent. I was just curious, so sorry, Stephen.
No, that's fine. But no, I mean, no, I don't think Henry has a plan other than, I think, honestly, I think he's got kind of a natural born killers kind of idea in his head. Like, I'll do this and then we'll run away and we'll just be together and nothing else will matter. Like, I think that's literally the extent of his plan. He clearly is not a young man who's thought things through. So like he's in enough of a state of arrested development that he's running after girls that are significantly younger than him. So I think this is not a young man who has thought anything through up to this point, other than his immediate impulses in this particular moment.
Do you think this is the first time that this particular neighborhood has had direct contact with like a purge situation?
I get that sense, yeah. Because they refer to the purge party that one of the neighbors usually has. Oh, are you having your annual purge party? And it makes it sound like, it made me think of the Super Bowl, like this thing that's happening away from us. That's a cultural phenomenon that we're going to get together and we're going to watch and we're going to experience, but we're not really a part of it. So I feel like it hasn't really touched them before.
Right.
He even says at one point, like, this kind of thing doesn't happen
here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you kind of get the direct idea, like, this is their first purge. Granted, it's not the first purge that they've witnessed, but it's the first purge that they've been a part of.
Even when you get the shot of the man sharpening, like, his machete in the backyard, you get that, like, if watching it, like, that voyeuristic shot from the backyard, you get the impression that, like, they're going to take the violence outside of the neighborhood. Like, they're not going to prey on their neighbors. Like, it's not going to be a Rand Paul situation where your neighbor gets, like, fed up with Rand Paul's shit. And that man is a hero, by the way, and he's going to, like, you're not going to settle the scores on Purge night with your neighbors over, like, lawn clippings or not picking up someone's dog poop in the yard. Like, you're going to take your machete, you're going to take your weapons, and you are going to go, if you're going to purge at all, you're going to do it elsewhere. You're going to leave.
You don't shit where you eat.
Exactly. That's kind of the idea that I got. And I was wondering if, like, the strangers that we see, like the masked purgers, are they part of this community? Like, is this their neighborhood? Is this their community? Or are they interlopers in it, because they're obviously on the same socioeconomic status as the rest of the neighborhood, but are they apart from or outside of it?
I got the sense they were from outside of it.
They know their names though. And I don't know if it's like on the mailbox or what, but they knew the name. They knew Mr. and Mrs. Sandman's
Well, they went to the
names.
other houses first and learned where the bloody stranger that they were hunting. They went to the other houses who said, "Hey, he's in the Sandins' house." Mm-hmm. At least that's what he claims. The polite leader, I think he's credited.
I mean,
Politely.
these guys strike me as like young Republicans
Yeah.
or, Hitler Youth or something, like just, the clean cut college kids who are like a little too into like free enterprise.
Right.
Like that's kind of the impression that I get off of these kids.
Yeah. If you set the Warriors in Greenwich, Connecticut instead of the Bronx, like this would be who you would see, right?
Holy shit, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, which now I want to see that movie.
Right.
Hey, Warriors, come out for your tea party.
Would you care to play?
Excellent. So, yeah, I feel they feel like they're trying to talk to them on their level. Like, look, we're both the same. Obviously, we're above this, and it is they view like these young where you see the Sandins really wrestling with what do we do here. Like we're going to send him out to die, but we feel really bad of it. And to your point, Stephen, it's not until he says, do it for your kids. It's not until they're given permission to do it. Okay, now you have my approval to do this morally indefensible thing. And that's what makes it so much more real. Like, oh, now I can go through with it. Now I don't want to anymore. Mm-hmm. Which to me, part of the appeal is it's illicit. It's, deep down, that it's not something you're supposed to do.
It's the transgressive nature of the thing.
And they've tried to dehumanize him so much, tie him to the chair, gag him, get him outside. They're talking about him like he's cargo or like an Amazon package or something. But when
the character doesn't even have a
Right.
name.
No, bloody stranger.
And so when he says, do it for your kids, well, now you can't deny his humanity anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because he's shown you now in these two moments more humanity than you've shown him the entire fucking movie.
Right. I had a note here at the audio, and we talked a little bit about this, like bringing it to the doorstep. And I listened closely to some of the audio at the end of the movie when they're playing the newscast. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty chilling things because it is spoken about, like the event is spoken about how we would have just talked about the Super Bowl or how we would talk about Black Friday sales after Thanksgiving. It's an epic event, like, oh, the largest one ever. The preliminary numbers are in. We had over 200 people purging at once in one square in Dallas. Like, isn't this wonderful? So it's celebrated like sport. And it kind of like, it ties into my idea of like part of the reasons why politics is so difficult right now is we cover politics like a horse race. Like there's clear winners and losers, and it's not about digesting ideas, but who had the best soundbite, who looked best on stage, who's articulating their point of view. And we're covering it like we would a horse race rather than something that has real consequences, like whatever side gets to choose or gets to implement their ideas, it's going to impact hundreds of millions of persons.
I think that's why I really like the microcosm look and feel of this movie, is because it does make it real. Like, I think if we'd had the like larger scope of like a movie that's kind of traveling through and visiting different purge locations, it kind of deadens that impact a little bit. But we see it like we're with this one group of people in this one place in this one night. And then what the footage at the beginning and what the audio at the end kind of tells us is this is not an isolated incident. The horrors that you saw here are literally happening all over the country, and it's accepted and it's approved of and it's seen as a good thing. Like everyone's like, think about the good that the Purge does. Like we do this so that we don't have to deal with crime for most of the rest of the year. Like violent crime is way down. Why? Because there's a purge. Like think of the good that it does for our society, and that's why we condone it. Like the evils that we're willing to accept because it makes our lives a little easier for a moment or two. Like the things that the atrocities that we're willing to accept and the ones that we aren't. And I think again, this small genre movie is able to really kind of focus our attention on those things better than I think a straightforward discussion of these things would.
And one of the things you just said there, like, think of all the good the Purge does. That is a line that Mrs. Sandin in particular says a number of times in the movie. Think of all the good it does. And it's not something that you say and give any real thought or depth to. It's something that you're conditioned to say, and you don't really even believe it, but you're like, I will just offer this empty platitude to my kid because I don't have any real words of comfort to offer. And if I had to really sit down and wrestle with the implications of what this night means, my head would explode. So I'll just say the most basic, empty soundbite is a means to maybe end the conversation.
Yep, 100%.
The last bit of the audio before the music to the credits roll is there's one man who says, I lost both of my sons tonight. The Purge took them from me. I was a proud American, but no more. This country has taken everything from me. Mm-hmm. And it made me, again, like just with this movie, like now the violence is right at their doorstep. It's actually come through the home. It's burst through. Now it's no longer like an intellectual exercise. It's something that this family has to confront in a very real way. Same with this man who's talking about, I lost my 2 sons. Like, the Purge was all well and good for everybody else. Like, it cleared out the neighborhood of the pores. It got rid of the riffraff. It got rid of the people, the ne'er-do-wells, and it was great for everybody. All those people could suffer. But the moment that it becomes real to me, well, geez, maybe this is a bad thing. And it's because of maybe a lack of empathy that we have. Things only feel real when we experience them directly. And I think that goes back to your point, Stephen, of like a society with very poor media literacy, and also maybe a society that doesn't put as much value in literature, in art, in music, in film. Because I think the beauty of art, the true beauty of art, especially with film and especially with literature, is it allows us to experience points of view and worldviews and culture that are so far outside of our own, and understand that human experience and empathize with it in a way that we may not be able to do otherwise. And to me, that is at the root of like, why are these books being removed from classrooms in Florida? It has nothing to do with teaching dangerous ideas. It has everything to do with teaching empathy. It has everything to do with teaching points of view that exist outside of our own experience, because we always have a need to have an other. We always have a need to demonize some subculture of persons or some segment of persons and deny them their full personhood. And it's through literature, it's through music, it's through art, it's through film that we gain a deeper experience, and that's why those things need to be removed.
And
it's easier to...
No. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's easier to unite people against something than it is in service of something.
That is true.
But... What were you going to say?
I know we probably don't want to talk about COVID too much, and so I won't
harp
on this point.
Of course we can.
Do it.
By all means, please.
We did a whole month on COVID and psychoanalysis. We're not
I know, and
it
it was very cathartic for me, and thank you for doing that. I need to watch The Harbinger.
It's so good.
I need to watch it. So, watching this during COVID lockdown, I couldn't help but think about it. And there are lots of examples of this idea of it doesn't matter to me until it shows up on my doorstep. I remember going through the Holocaust Museum in Chicago, and there's like this plaque where it's like, first they came for these people and I wasn't one of these people, and it goes through all these different people. It's like, and then they came for me and there was no one left to say anything. And like that, I cried when I saw that. Like, that hit me really hard. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about. And with COVID, I saw that a lot, so someone very close to me is immunocompromised, and so we had a hard time going through COVID, just trying to like figure things out and keep things safe. And a lot of people just sort of seem to be like, I don't care about this, or I don't believe in this, or I'm not going to take precautions until it became a problem for them. And I'm not talking about people who had to go to work, had to go to school, had to put their kids in daycare. Like, I'm not talking about people who didn't have choices to make. I'm talking specifically about people who are like, I don't believe this, I'm not going to acknowledge this, until it became real for them. And so when I was watching The Purge for the first time while all that was going on, I was kind of like, I need to talk to someone right now, because I was like, I can't process this. It just felt so super duper real. So, yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
That's a great point. No, I think that is a really good point. It wasn't until, and we see it on social media, the fuck around and find out. And I know, and it's a part of me that I don't like, but there's a part of me that took joy in seeing the contrast in one post of like, this is stupid, you're a bunch of sheeple, I did my own research, fake virus, fake news, and then like, hey, this person is either hospitalized in ICU or has even died from, my take was like, okay, I have no sympathy for that person, and I don't necessarily like that part of myself, but it exists, and it's there for me to wrestle with.
Schadenfreude it feels really good in the moment, but when you take a step back and have to reckon with it, not always a good look.
No. I have some stuff here on what the economic and psychological effects of the Purge would be.
God,
why don't we do
please.
one of them tonight? Let's do, because I think that we're going to get more and more into this. So I'm going to have a little bit more on what the economic impact of the Purge, because the whole idea behind, or the whole spark behind the Purge is that it's going to stimulate the economy. It's going to, and I guess if there are less people to work, then your number will go down by nature. Like if you kill off X amount of the population in one night, then those jobs still need to be filled. Maybe that's one of the drivers of the economy.
Yeah.
Maybe that keeps unemployment down.
Yeah. The stated idea is like if we have this cathartic event where for one night all of our anger, all of our sense of injustice, all of our feelings come out, we can do whatever we want, then the rest of the year will be fine. And we'll talk more about why that is a lark, why that is not the case in future episodes. But found a really good article on Forbes, why a real life purge would be terrible for the economy, by Jeff Ewing. And, Forbes magazine is not it's not like a bastion of like liberal thought. Like it's not like this liberal think tank that is, saying like, how dare. So there's a few different points that Jeff made in his article here. Number one, you see the division between the wealthy and the poor throughout these movies, and you focus on it here. You have like a very wealthy community. The wealthy, like this whole neighborhood, they were all able to afford these very high-end, high-tech security systems. Their homes, by their nature, are going to be more secure. They're going to be more off limits, and the wealthy are going to be able to better protect themselves and withstand that night of the purge. If they choose to go out and purge, well, they're more able to afford, not only can they keep themselves locked down, but they can afford better firepower. I mean, you see what Ethan Hawke is he's packing a mini bazooka / shotgun. Like, that is a badass weapon that he has.
It was
there.
enough to rival Reggie's, quad.
The quad gun?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Reggie Bannister would feel right at home in the Purge.
I need that crossover event now.
Oh, my goodness. But they can afford the more expensive firepower, whereas vulnerable communities, the poor, those that are in mass housing, where you have like maybe one door with a single lock that divides you from the street, the unhoused community, the working class, like they're not going to be able to afford to protect themselves. These communities are going to get hit the hardest, but also within these communities, essential workers, providers, small businesses, and other essential services, they're going to be attacked. They're going to be non-operational or severely hindered in cleanup efforts. So you're going to have not just this one night where your business closes just because you kind of have to in a case like this, but the amount of cleanup that has to be done. You know, if you're a small business that's been ransacked, you're not going to have the means in order to function, and that's going to create a further divide in your community between the wealthy and the poor. Purging is not going to satisfy the wealthy for a year in terms of like, okay, we got everything out of our system, now we're going to commit no more violent acts for this year. No, like there's a argument for what they call institutional economics, and it makes an argument that the institutions that we put in place, whether it's government, economic, structural systems that we have, all of these things shape our habits, and they produce common and repeatable behaviors that drive our daily lives. And I found this article, What Are Institutions, by an institutional economist, Jeffrey Hodgson. And he argued, by structuring, constraining, and enabling individual behaviors, institutions have the power to mold the capacities and behaviors of agents in fundamental ways. They have a capacity to change aspirations instead of merely enabling or constraining them. So, depending on your socioeconomic status and what backing you have behind you, that's going to shape your behavior for a year. So if you're really rich and you're really wealthy and you have all of these means at your disposal, one night a year to act out isn't going to be enough. Number one, because this night actually rewards purging the poor from society, so you're going to be rewarded for continuing to do so. Or at the very least, the elite will turn a blind eye to your actions and you will not suffer consequences for your action. Insurance premiums in marginalized communities, like just owning a home, owning a business, owning an automobile, your insurance is going to be at a much higher rate. And to your point, Ariel, I think I read this in the course of this article, like before the Purge in one of the movies, like a business owner gets a call, yeah, your insurance just like tripled or quadrupled or something. And you're no longer going to be able to pay those prices where the wealthy will continue to be able to pay at a normal rate because they're going to be more protected. And that's why the idea of a flat tax is always such a dangerous idea, and how it benefits the wealthy and really hurts the working class. Because if everyone's paying the same rate, if you have 10% of $1 million, yes, it's a lot of money. You have a lot more money left over to buy goods and services. Lastly, small businesses would be decimated due to not being able to afford the insurance rates. Real estate prices in these areas would go up because of the high risk. Security costs to protect your investments, whether it's your home, your car, your business, and the cost of cleanup and replacing the material goods that you need, such as windows, shelving, computer systems. All of those costs are going to impact small business owners in these affected communities after a purge event, and eventually you're going to probably have to close up shop. So those are some of the reasons why a purge event would be such a awful event. And in future episodes, we'll talk more of the psychology behind the purge, and also we'll talk more about how institutions, or how like liberal institutions in particular, having like a state overrun everything is meant to, how oftentimes it's used as fear mongering to say, be careful of these others. The cartoon that I'm often drawn to, there's a picture of like a older white gentleman with a huge plate of cookies in front of him, and it's obviously very coded as a Republican male, and he's looking at a working class white male on one side of his table, and across from them is a man with brown skin, like an immigrant, who has one cookie on his plate, and the working class man has one cookie on his plate. And you have the older male looking at the white working class guy going, be very careful, that foreigner, he's coming to steal your cookie. And meanwhile, this man has like 50 in front of him. And I think that kind of sums up this kind of economic system in a nutshell. End rant again. Sorry.
That's good stuff, man.
Do we have anything else? Is there anything I'm missing here? Anything we wanted to cover that we didn't touch on?
Two tiny things I wanted to mention.
No, go long. Take your time.
So, the blue flowers that they put out in front of their house to show support of the Purge, it's not the same thing, but it reminded me of how after 9/11, a lot of people put American flags up who didn't have them before. Just as sort of like it was more about showing your neighbors so they wouldn't question you. And that's what it seems like the blue flowers are, too. Like, you put the blue flowers out, really, because that's what's expected. It reminded me of American flags. The other thing I wanted to mention, which is a fun, lighthearted thing, is that it almost completely borrows a shot from The Strangers. There's a scene where, and I can't remember which character it is now, but one of the Sandins is in their home and you're looking right at them and then they move and there's a masked purger standing behind them and then they kind of move out of the frame and it's almost exactly like that shot in The Strangers where you're focusing on Liv Tyler and the like bag face guys in the background.
Good catch.
Yes. So
this owes a lot to The Strangers, doesn't it? Like
so.
the way this movie, which is a great home, because this really is like just a home invasion movie. Like you could remove the Purge from this movie and do it as a home invasion movie and you have like a pretty solid horror flick. Oh, here's what I wanted to ask you both. The neighbors at the end, because Stephen, you mentioned them, their motivations for wanting to purge the Sandins. And I think it ties a lot into the economics. Like these are all very wealthy people. They just don't happen to have as much as the Sandins, and they're pissed about it. What do we think of this?
It's not just that they don't have as much, it's that they feel the Sandins have profited off of their good nature, or that they've been duped somehow. Because he in his own has gone to all of his neighbors and sold them all security systems. And they've watched him do it. They've watched him go to literally every house in the neighborhood. And then based on what he was able to do, it's a keeping up with the Joneses thing, right? But in this case, you can't keep up with the Joneses because you're the one giving money to the Joneses. And now America's got this built-in day where I can do whatever I want and I can get mine back from the Joneses. And aren't I going to take that opportunity as a kind of wealthy suburbanite? Like, isn't that something I'm going to want to do? And I think, I mean, so in terms of a story perspective, I get it. And honestly, it's what I was expecting from the beginning when the neighbor lady who has the purge parties is like, well, you know, we've seen your husband sell all of us and that's what paid for that extra, you know, that new addition on your house. So I'm expecting it. And then I forget all about it because actual purgers. And then when they come and save them from the purgers at the end, that all comes rushing back. And I'm like, oh shit. Like that was the plan from the get-go. Like you see them mobilizing. You're like, okay, that's where this movie's going. And then it doesn't. And then it doubles back on that. At the moment you've forgotten that was a thing, it comes back to it and you're like, fuck, this is the best movie ever.
I feel like I wonder too if they are especially offended by the Sandins' wealth, because it's almost a throwaway line where Ethan Hawke is looking at boats to buy and he says, last year we could barely make rent, now we're talking about buying a boat. So they've had a come up very quickly. And so I wonder if their neighbors still kind of look at them as like, you know, not really one of us, not really having the money that we do. And they were all at a party together that the Sandins didn't get invited to. She lied and said she wasn't having her party, but she did. And so I feel like they all whipped themselves into a frenzy and went over there. And I also wonder if the cookies were poisoned. I wonder that every time I watch the movie, because there's this big show of her forcing cookies on Mrs. Sandin and being like, you know, take these dang cookies. And then the other neighbor drives by and he's like, oh, you're gonna love those cookies. And then they never come up again. And I'm like, and while they're eating dinner, they're like, oh, there's no carbs in this dinner. So they're like clearly doing a no carb thing. And so I'm like, if they had eaten the cookies, were those poisoned? But that's just me with my corkboard and my red string.
I like that.
I don't know.
I like that.
That's an interesting thread. I think it's supposed to be just like we're your friendly neighbors, and that's. But they don't revisit it, and now that you mention that, I'm just like, were the cookies poisoned?
I mean, that'd be really
'Cause they absolutely
anticlimactic
could have been.
for a night where you can go murder people violently, but no
But
muss,
then
no
you
fuss.
but I can see another version of this movie where the coda is, the night we just had, I just want to have a cookie, and you see like the neighbors that are still there kind of look at each other, and you see her like start to froth at the mouth and just like keel over, or the kid does it, like the son, like after you've done all this to like keep the son safe, he eats the cookie and dies. Like I can see, like, if you want to give this movie an extra gut punch that I don't know that it needs, particularly given everything we've just seen,
That would be
I
too
think
mean.
so.
That would
Yeah.
be
I agree.
too mean.
Yeah.
but I can see another version of this movie
Yep.
doing that. I don't think it's as good a movie, but I think I can see it happening.
What do you think is more chilling? The dispassion of which that the neighbors are able to subdue the Sandins and tell them exactly what they're going to do with them, because it's a pretty like very matter of fact, and these are people that you live with and they're part of your community all year, and that they're very able to very quickly justify killing them. Like, well, it's going to allow us to purge ourselves of our negative feelings towards you, and it's just the way it's just going to happen. It's the way it's going to be, and there's nothing you can do about it. Is that chilling, or is it more chilling to think of the 364 days leading up to that day when you put a smile on your face every day, you talk about the weather, you talk about your pets, you wave, you trade cookies, maybe they have like a neighborhood book, like you could see them having a wine club or a book club and backyard barbecues. Is it more chilling to think of like the 364 days between when you're seething and want nothing more to murder these people, but you're putting on your best face?
I mean, that's like American Psycho, and that's scarier when it's not happening, Yeah.
Sure.
It's, I mean, yeah, it's, and that's, I think that's why that's chilling, is what is it that makes these seemingly ordinary people willing to take these extremes? Like, what is it? But here's the thing, when everything is legal for one day, when everything becomes permissible, you don't even need that big of a push to get you to that point, because you know there aren't going to be any consequences for it.
The only other thing I like that. The only other thing I had was Charlie's robot.
Oh my
and
gosh.
how he's
Timmy.
like
Me.
perving. He's perving on his mom, because like there's that shot where like it spends a lot of time looking at Lena Headey's feet. Like there's a long shot of the robot doing that. And Charlie's looking at that, and then
Tarantino has a lot to answer for.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say.
but it zooms up, and Lena Headey is like kind of like bent over in a scolding position, and there's definitely some psychosexual undertones that are going on in that shot. It brings up some feelings, is all I'm saying.
I didn't think of that at all.
Yeah, I'm a dirty man, so definitely, I am a dirty birdie here.
Someone has to be.
Someone has to be, so...
Takes all kinds, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I see it now that you're saying it. Just at the time, I didn't.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is the vibe I got like in that moment was like it was a humiliation fetish, like, because she's like, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be spying, and it's cropped in such a way where it'd be like a humiliation video, and I just saw that in that moment. So,
but also combined with the voyeuristic element of it all as well.
Yeah.
Like we're kind of compounding our taboos at this point, and really between that and what this kid witnessed in this night, he's not going to have a normal adulthood.
Nope. I thought it was the kid from Cobra Kai. I thought it was like LaRusso's kid, because he looked so much like him, except this is a little bit older, so it kind of predates Cobra Kai. So I'm just like, just roundhouse the kid, like, where's Daniel LaRusso? Yeah, and I think the only other talk with the talking about the wealth and this neighborhood, there are a lot of shots of the opulence of this home. There's a heavy focus on the game room in particular, and this idea of acquiring things. Like there's a pinball machine and a regulation pool table. There are a lot of things that nobody really needs,
and nobody's
but you
using.
seek to acquire.
You know?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Both the kids go hide in their rooms, which that's not too surprising for teenagers, but it's like the game room does not look like a playroom. It looks like a show space.
Possession for its own sake.
Yeah. We had a room in my house growing up, the parlor. We never used it. There was a nice couch and a nice little table and a little bit of art and a fireplace. So never used it as children. We weren't really allowed in that room, I should say. Like company was allowed in there, and we would have dinners in there. But yeah, it was just like, this is a room, because I think my dad grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment as the youngest of 4 children from Armenian refugees who escaped the Armenian genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Empire. And my grandmother made shoes for 50 years, and my grandfather cut hair for 50 years, and my dad slept with his 3 brothers in one room. And I think they liked having one room that was like, we don't do anything with this room. And it wasn't opulent or fancy. It was just like, nope, it's the parlor. And I just always remember that, and my friends saying, your house is like a museum. Like, it's very nice. It's always cold, and you're not allowed to touch anything. And I think
which is a line from Ferris Bueller too, I think.
Is it?
I think it is.
Something like that. I didn't put 2 and 2 together, but thank you. So, any final thoughts?
I'm gonna make a very bold statement right now, and I'm gonna come down as saying that Purge is a movie, very good. Purge is an actual concept, very bad. Don't do it.
Very bad. Very good.
All right, it's a hot
taking
take.
the strong hot take.
I know. Look, I'm coming in hot tonight. I think I prepped you all for that. I like this movie. I'm excited to see where the franchise goes. Ari was giving me some, when she was like prepping you, I'm like, okay, where's it going? Like I'm ready to engage with the rest of this franchise now. I'm super stoked, so I can't wait.
It's not like the Phantasm Journey. I
mean, what
nothing.
is?
And I haven't seen the Forever Purge. That's the only one I haven't seen. But yeah, I'm so excited to listen along and watch along as you guys go through all these. Yeah.
Yeah. Much like Phantasm, it is very much the vision of one creator, because you have James DeMonaco writes and directs the first 3. He writes the next 2, and my understanding is he's pitched a 6th movie, because Jason Blum has said, I want to do another one, but only if James wants to do one. He kind of sees this as very much his baby.
That's
I like
awesome.
that, by the way. I really like the idea. And DeMonaco it is said, like, oh, you know what? I think I have an idea where we can kind of really turn the franchise on its ear a little bit. So I'm interested. And I won't say these aren't my favorite movies. I do appreciate the bottleneck or the encapsulated story that you have in this one more a decade on in. But I think that there's like a lot of meat to chew on. Like, I have about 7 tabs open of articles I've only half read that I think will fit in with some later episodes. So I'm really fascinated to talk about these movies over the next month. So for the next 2 weeks, we have Anarchy coming up, and then the Purge election year. If you like our political discussions, I'm sure you'll love that particular one. And then I believe we'll have, just based on how the timing works out, we'll have a 1-week break from The Purge, because that's when we'll be covering Scream 6, which comes out March 10th. So we will be covering that probably within, our episode should probably drop within about 4 days of that movie hitting theaters. So it'll be, I think, a very movie-centric. There won't be a lot of background on that one. I have muted
Same.
all mention of Scream and Ghostface and other, because I guess there was a spoiler that went up that I'm very happy I was able to miss. But we'll cover Scream. Then we have the final 2 Purge episodes after that. And then that might be when Evil Dead Rise hits, just based on the timing. So we have a really fun couple of months planned for y'all. But this was our discussion on the first Purge this was our discussion on the first Purge movie, The Purge, The Purgening. My goodness.
Why wasn't Purge 2 called The Purgening?
Yes. Purging 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Back in the habit.
Which I saw in theaters.
Purge 2 Hyper Purge.
I've never seen Electric Boogaloo. I've seen Electric Boogaloo in theaters. Or Electric Boogaloo 2 in theaters.
Well,
yes.
The first one's Break-In, and then Break-In 2 is Electric Boogaloo.
That's the one I saw in theaters. Okay.
Yeah.
I sat
and
behind...
they came out the same year. The first one was so profitable, they rushed the second one into production. Came out the exact same year as the first one.
They pulled a Ty West.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah.
Although that wasn't
a
rush.
No.
I sat behind my quote-unquote friends who didn't invite me to John's birthday party. So it was...
How dare they?
I sat right behind them in the theater.
Did you kick their seat the whole time? Because I would have.
I don't think it hit me until later on that, like, oh, that was his birthday party, and I wasn't enough of his friend to be invited. So, John from Drake at Mass, that's probably who I would go after in the Purge.
I was going to say,
that memory.
For the Purge, let's go, leave a flaming dog poop on his front stoop or something.
Should I block the name out? I would never purge anybody.
Just an innocent
beat
thing,
the name out.
I said.
Yeah, it would be innocent. His family owned a turkey farm. So dog poop would actually be it would be like leaving like a nice fresh fragrance compared to turkey, like hundreds of turkeys.
We could saran wrap his
turkey
car.
poop. Yeah, because we used to play basketball in his barn. They had an indoor basketball court in the barn, and the cool thing was like indoor basketball court in a barn. The bad thing was hundreds
Indoor
of turkeys
basketball court in a barn.
making poop all the time. So
man.
All right.
I can't imagine that was well ventilated either.
No, it was
If
not.
we're going to tell stories, we could do a whole farm corner. We won't, but we could sometime.
That would be the patron.
Ari and I are Midwestern people here, so.
And I grew up in a farm town, so we could share some things. Maybe when we relaunch the patron, that's what we
start
will
with
do.
farm
There
stories.
we go.
Yeah.
Farm talk.
So let's wrap it up. Let's talk about where you can find us all at. And Stephen, tell us about Disenfranchised and what you have. Heard you had a really good guest on.
That's what I heard.
Episode.
We had an okay guest. Yeah. No. So for those of you who don't know, Disenfranchised is we're a podcast about franchises of one. We talk about movies that were meant to get franchises but didn't. So kind of the opposite of this podcast. And we just had, because Valentine's Day was last week, we had our perennial Valentine on. Your very own host, Mike Snoonian, has been on for every Valentine's episode that we've had in the 3 years that we've been a podcast. He came on to talk the original 1981 My Bloody Valentine, the 2009 My Bloody Valentine remake, and this year he came on to talk 2001's Valentine. So we're running out of Valentine-centric horror failed franchise starters, so we might have to get a little outside the box next year. But yeah,
I contain multitudes.
This I know. And so I'm not terribly concerned. I have a feeling we'll come up with something for you. Even if we have to talk The Love Guru, we'll find something for you to come on and talk with.
Oh, wow.
That's the one you're going to be sick for?
I will. It would be hard to break tradition. Kind of like Cal Ripken Jr., probably didn't want to go out there night after night, every night. Mm-hmm. But, he did. He laced up the spikes, so I got to be the Cal Ripken Jr. of the Halloween episodes.
Look, we're gonna put off Love Guru for as long as we possibly can. There are some other things I have on the list to tick off before we get there. So
good.
Don't worry, we're not jumping right into that one. No worries.
And did we mention where we can find everything?
You can find the Disenfranchised podcast on Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, and Facebook at DisenfranchPod. You can find me on Instagram, Letterboxd, and Twitter at Chewy Walrus.
Excellent. And Ariel, how about yourself?
Yes. So please check out ghoulsmagazine.com. It is a horror magazine, a webzine that looks at horror through the female perspective. And there's a ton of free articles and podcast episodes out there. We just are wrapping up our Valentine's Day stuff too, but we do anti-Valentine's at Ghouls. So we've covered The Loved Ones, we've covered Necromantic, Necromantic 2. We've got lists of like the worst boyfriends in horror. But we also have a lot of members-only content. So for £4.99 a month, you can get access to exclusive episodes and articles. So definitely check out Ghouls Magazine if you haven't already. And you can find me on socials, Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram. I'm mostly on Twitter and Letterboxd. I'm trying to figure out how to use Instagram, but I'm at Ari_Hellraiser, and I post all my stuff that's happening on my Twitter, so you can find me there.
Excellent. And listeners, you know me. You can find me at Mike_Snoonian over on Twitter and Instagram. At Letterboxd, you can find me at Mike Chumpchange. You can also listen to my other show, Psychoanalysis, a horror therapy podcast, where we cover horror movies nearly exclusively through the lens of like their psychology. Bunch of really fun episodes. It's been a really fun month. We've done kind of like couples problems and romantic problems, where we've done Possession, An American Werewolf in London. We just posted our episode on Ty West's X. We've had a number of phenomenal guests. It's usually Jen, Laura, and myself. Jen and Laura have gone on hiatus just to kind of rest and recover and take care of themselves, because it's been a tough year for a lot of folks. So I am handling the duties there right now, and have had like so many people step up to help out and keep it going. So check out Psychoanalysis, a horror therapy podcast as well. And please, for this show, do us a favor. Go ahead and leave us a review. Rate, review, and subscribe to wherever you're getting your podcast from. But rating us on Apple Podcasts and leaving a few kind words in a review. 5 stars only, because anything less than that kind of hurts any podcast, which kind of sucks, because 4.5 stars is still really fucking good. I mean, it's an A. But 5 stars only. Why you like the show. It should take you 2 minutes, and I can't stress enough how huge it is. Like, whenever we get a few new reviews, we see our numbers go up. We see us listed higher on the Apple Podcast landing page. It's a huge boost for us. Check out our website, podandthependulum.com. All of our back episodes are listed there. There's some great cover art. I'm thinking of toying around with a few other little things we can do to make that a more fan-friendly experience as well. Like, we could add a voicemail line to that page. So if listeners wanted to leave us their thoughts on the movies we cover, or your own personal Purge list.
I was going to say, call in with your Purge crimes.
Could
Absolutely.
be. We could use those in future court cases and criminal cases that would arise.
Leave us a 5-star review or else.
Right. But thank you so much for listening. We do hope you've enjoyed this. And again, I thought this would be a tight 90, but here we are. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate everybody that has not only listened to our show, but spread the word, has listed us among their favorite podcasts, and have told others about us. Like, we are a completely independent show. There's no network we're on. I do very little to market it. It is all based on the strength of like the co-hosts that we have, the guests that we have, and you as listeners like spreading the good word. And watching this grow over the past few years really warms my heart, and it's you to thank. So we appreciate you. So all I'm saying is we appreciate you. Have a fantastic week, and we'll be back next time with The Purge Anarchy.
Safe night.
Bye.